The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. When President Roosevelt said these now famous words, Americans were afraid. They were afraid due to the economic turmoil and uncertainty brought on by the Great Depression. After the Depression, Americans began to fear Hitler and Hirohito. After them, they were scared of Stalin, Khrushchev, and nuclear annihilation. But luckily, cooler heads prevailed and the Berlin Wall came down. One would think that Americans would then breathe a collective sigh of relief. But this is not the case, as the 1990s marked the beginning of the most fearful era in American history. When Americans stopped being afraid of one thing and began to be afraid of almost everything. This marks an important cultural shift and the beginning of America's culture of fear. Today, I'm going to define this new type of fear. I will then dispel any belief that you have that America is more dangerous and that we should be afraid. I'll then tell you what really spread America's culture of fear. So how is this new kind of fear different? As you know, fear is a natural part of the human condition and is not a new emotion. Fear can even be beneficial, like the fear of a disease driving a scientist to find a cure. Where we get into trouble is when fear invades almost every aspect of our lives, and that is what's facing Americans today. Sociologist Frank Furedi writes in his book that Americans do not fear a single thing like in the previous eras. They have a more promiscuous, pluralistic form of fearing. While previous generations feared together and felt connected by this fear, Americans now feel fear alone and feel separated, isolated, and helpless. But maybe we should be afraid. Maybe America's fear culture is warranted, as the United States is a very dangerous place. But I have found the opposite to be true. Many experts say that this is the safest time to live in American history. An essay by Steven Pinker cites that the chance of being killed in America today is less than 1% compared to 15 to even 60% in the most dangerous times in human history. The murder rate in the United States has also seen a steady decline since the 1990s. A book by Barry Glassner gives us a good example of a fear that has been blown out of proportion, and this is the fear of kidnapping. He cites a statistic that says that 800,000 children go missing in America each year. Now, based on this, I would think that parents should never let their kids leave the house unsupervised. But this statistic is misleading, as many of these children are runaways. Some are rejected by their parents, and some are taken by family members during a custody battle and later safely returned. While in actuality, only 200 to 300 children are abducted by strangers each year. Now, parents should still be wary, but they should not be terrified. So why are we afraid? What are the real sources? Well, many horrific events have driven America's fear culture. Two such events were the Columbine shooting and 9/11. On April 20th, 1999, two students opened fire at Columbine High School in Colorado, killing 13 and injuring 21. An article by John Cloud cites a study that found that a year after the Columbine shooting, 70% of parents believed that a Columbine-style shooting was possible in their children's high school. Parents began to wonder if their kids were safe anywhere. Before 9/11, America had tangible and finite enemies, but after 9/11, America's faced a faceless enemy when attacks could come from almost anywhere. There have been many more such events that have added to America's fear culture, but the driving force behind America's development of a fear culture is the media, politicians, and even corporations. The mantra in newsrooms for years has been, if it bleeds, it leads. News outlets love to portray scary events to get good ratings. Marcus Felsen and Rachel Boba describe this using the horror distortion sequence, which goes like this. Media outlets tell horror stories to make money and entertain people. These stories then build misconceptions in people's mind, and then they add on to these misconceptions for their next story. As these misconceptions grow, fear is the result. Fear can also be used for political gain, like the fear of gun violence used by politicians to pass legislation for or against gun control. Fear can even be used by corporations for monetary gain. An article by Julie Haynes tells us that in 1993 there were only a handful of antibacterial products, like soaps and hand sanitizer. But in 2009, there were over 9,000 of these products, grossing over $930 billion a year. This is after the FDA came out and said that these products are not any better at preventing infection than regular products. But corporations used Americans' fear of disease to make lots and lots of money. Over the past 20 years, America has seen a significant cultural shift. We stopped being afraid of one thing and began to fear almost everything. This is a new kind of fear, a fear that separates us instead of brings us together. We have found that this fear is widely unwarranted, like with the fear of child abductions, and that it was driven by horrific events like 9/11, Columbine, and many more that tend to stick in people's minds. But the biggest perpetrators of America's fear culture were media, politicians, and corporations. So how do we overcome this fear? Well, there's no one simple answer. But it will do us all good to pay attention to what is said to us in advertisements, by politicians, and during news stories, and to take it all with a grain of salt. We should act in the face of tragedies to ensure that they do not happen again, but we cannot let the fear of a reoccurrence dominate our daily lives. And most importantly, Americans should take a good long look at President Roosevelt's famous words and remember that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Thank you.